In order to explain MODO's UVing tools, I've brought in this section of our blacksmith model, but before we do that, I'm going to quickly draw your attention to these tabs running across the top. Now currently I'm in the Model tab, and these basically represent layouts that you could use for certain things inside of MODO, so things like modeling, painting, UVing, animation, or rendering. Now these are things that you don't have to use. They're kind of recommendations, things that might help your workflow and make the process a little bit easier, but you can certainly go ahead and customize these as much as you want. You can also use things like the rendering functionality inside of other setups, so I often find myself preview rendering inside the Model tab. So don't feel kind of locked to these tabs at all. You don't have to use them if you don't want to, but it might be a great starting point if you're just learning the app. You can also go in and customize your workflow, customize your layout even, by hitting this little plus up here, which will add another tab in this line. You can also use this little yellow circle in the top left-hand corner of this viewport. If I right-click that, we get options in here for duplicating, maybe putting it on another monitor, splitting horizontally, vertically, etc., and importantly, saving these out so they can be restored at any point. So with that done, I am going to switch over to our UV view here at the top, and this gives us this side-by-side view. So on the left we have our UV viewport, on the right-hand side here I have my 3D model, and the first thing we want to do is look at any UV maps that are already associated with this mesh. And to do that, I'm going to select my blacksmith item up here in my items list. I'm going to come down to lists, and in this top section I'll roll down UV maps. Now inside of here you can see we have one item called texture, and if I select it, it will appear over here on the left hand side. Now interestingly, what you'll notice is that we actually have polygon selection, vertice selection currently, in both our UV map and our 3D view, and that works both ways. So again, another way that MODO really gets selection done correctly. Now in order to look at this, the one thing that you want a UV map to be is really kind of undistorted. So when you apply the texture to the surface, you're going to get a similar resolution of texture across the entire object. Now normally the way to check that would be to bring in something like a checkerboard texture or a UV pattern, apply it to the object, and actually look physically at the model to see roughly how distorted it looks. And most of the time this can be fairly simple, but sometimes it can be actually quite difficult to see whether or not things are distorted and going to affect you when you do your final texture. Well, in MODO 6.01 they introduced a new feature, and it's up here in the options section in our left-hand UV view. If you select it, down at the very bottom we have show distortion. Now if I turn this on, we're going to introduce a bit of color into our viewport. I'm just going to make this a bit bigger, and you can see we essentially have three colors. We have blue, we have green, and we have red. Now these represent different things, with blue and green being differing levels of distortion, blue being no distortion whatsoever, green being a middling level of distortion, and red, as you can probably imagine, being an awful lot of distortion. So the red polygons inside of here are ones that we might want to take another look at. So with that done, we're going to create a brand new UV map. I'm just going to drag this out to the middle, and to do that I come down to my UV maps list. At the bottom we have a new map option. I'm just going to click that. I'm going to say new map and just hit OK. Now with that done, you can see our UVs will disappear over here on the left, although you do have option to copy UVs between maps. You can also bake textures and procedural textures between maps as well, which certainly for game workflows could be very, very useful. So in this case, I'm going to select my new map because the selected map is the one that you're working on. And I'm going to introduce you to these three sections at the top here. So these are the three kind of workflows you have for doing UVing inside of MODO. Now the first one, the UV projection tool, this contains projection types, which are the kind of common types between apps. So things like planar, cylindrical, spherical, atlas, etc. Now to use that, we have a few extra options down here. I'm just going to switch it to automatic quickly. You select the type in this list and just click once in your UV viewport, and you can see straight away, well, we've done a planar projection. We've got our show distortion on, so we can see it's still looking a bit distorted in places. But if I turn that off, what you might notice is that we still actually have some red in here. And this red basically means that we have overlapping polygons. And this, in the world of UV mapping, is obviously a big no-no. So we need to do something to better UV this. Now we could try a different projection type in here, something like cylindrical maybe, it doesn't look much better, or potentially we could come to something like planar and try a manual projection instead, so we actually get a gimbal in the viewport at this point that we can rotate into place if we wish, or scale, etc. But this actually isn't going to cut it for this part of the model, so let's try the second one down, which is project from view. Now exactly as you might imagine, basically this means that I can come into a 3D viewport, rotate to a correct angle, click once, and it will project along that view straight down into my UV viewport, which in some circumstances can be very helpful. But as you can see in this one, we've still got that red, which isn't what we want. So I'm going to move to the third option, which is the Unwrap tool. And for me, this is really the one that I use all the time. It's probably the one that I actually go to first because it is so very, very fast. So I'm going to come into the Unwrap tool, and the one setting you want to look at in here really to begin with is the iterations value. And by default, I think that's about 150, 250, something around there. And this iterations value is essentially how hard MODO is going to try to unwrap the object and make it completely flat so that we don't get these overlapping polygons. So let's have a quick look at how well it does. So I'm going to just select my Unwrap tool and click once in the viewport. And you can see straight away, no red overlapping polygons. So it's obviously doing something correctly. So let's go in and take a closer look. I'm going to go back to my options, bring in my show distortion. And what we can see is that, well, we have got a lot of distortion here in the middle. And the reason for that is that although it's completely flat in UV space, we do actually have a complete eye cavity in here at the back. So in order to try and fit all this in and make it all flat, it's having to distort this section quite a lot. Now, a way that we can control this inside of MODO, I'm just going to hit space to drop the tool temporarily, is to come in and use edge selection to define where we make cuts in UV space. So what I can do is go to edge selection mode by hitting 2, double click an edge loop that will go all the way around this eye section, come back over into my UV viewport, select the Unwrap tool and click again. And what we should now see is that we get two definite sections of mesh. We get a section which represents most of the face, so outside of this edge loop, and then we get this section at the top which represents everything on the right side of the edge loop, or the eye socket itself. Now clearly at the moment you can see we've got some curves in here, some overlapping polygons in this section, so we can tell MODO to maybe try a little bit harder. We can put that iterations value up to 500, and that will just take a little bit extra time, but it'll try a little bit harder to make it all flat. Now you can play with a few other options down here. Personally, I like to first of all come to the projection axis, which is the first axis that it will project along. Now Z looks pretty much correct for that one, so it's projecting along this way, which is the way my face is facing. You can try changing the pinning axis, potentially initial projection as well, to try and get this a little bit better. And of course you can up these iterations to quite high values. Of course the higher the value, the longer it is going to take, but you'll notice this is getting better and better over time. You also have tools in here for doing things like relaxing the UVs. So once you've got this laid out, you can actually pin vertices in place and it will kind of relax and smooth the UV values inside of those. So that's it for UVing really. I'm not going to go too much further into it because watching me UV a model isn't going to be that interesting, but I hope from this you can see how powerful these tools are. I mean, just the fact that I've got this section all green here, we've got a few little bits of red, might need a little bit of relaxing, but this was done very, very quickly. And just going through selecting those edges to discern the different sections you'll find in UV space, and then tapping the Unwrap tool, that's a very quick process. And for me, it takes a lot of the pain out of UVing. So that is a quick introduction to UVing in MODO. We're now going to go on and take a quick look at texturing.